We are back at the PMI Global Congress 2013 in New Orleans, and I am sitting here with Samad Aidan in the PMI bookstore. Hello, Samad.
Well, hello. Thank you.
How is your conference going so far?
It's going great. It's really going great. I'm enjoying it.
Wonderful. Yesterday afternoon, you gave a presentation titled Cultural Neuroscience, Cultural Intelligence for Global Project Managers. How did it go?
It went really well. I've been coming to this event for the last 3 years, and I spoke at 2011 and 2012. And I have to say, this is my favorite performance. I feel really good about how I did, just because I stuck to the script and I didn't deviate from it, and I had plenty of time at the end for interaction, which is my goal, and so I achieved it. And then the audience really responded to this topic. They really enjoyed the insights that were shared.
How many people were there?
There was, I believe, approximately 70 people.
Okay.
So it was a good turnout.
Now, neuroscience, it's the title, Cultural Neuroscience. Neuroscience, it's about the brain. Why? What does it have to do with project management?
Well, for the last 5 to 6 years, I've been really digging deep into looking at what is the research out there about the brain that that we can, as project managers, we can use to be better leaders. Because at the end of the day, our business is trying to motivate people, trying to get them to engage, trying to get them to focus, pay attention. All of these processes are brain-based processes. So it makes sense for us as project managers to actually understand what is the underlying inputs and outputs to these processes, similar to what we do about project management and understanding, how the PMBOK is structured. I believe that we need to focus on the underlying mechanisms that drive behavior and drive thoughts and drive feelings and emotions. And I think this explosion of research that's happening in neuroscience, and especially in a branch called the social, cognitive, and affective neuroscience, which deals with things such as how people make decisions, what are the drivers for collaboration, what is the underlying neural activations that underlie, for example, trust, and in general, communication in general. So these things are very important topics that we as project managers can benefit from understanding what is happening in the field of neuroscience.
Okay. How does this help the project manager out there? Our listeners, they're all project managers. They have projects that they go back to after they finish listening to us here. Will it help them in any way?
Well, absolutely. I think if you look at the challenges that we face in projects, we really don't face the challenge in projects when it comes to the day-to-day procedures and processes that are specifically project management processes. We deal with the challenges, or the most challenging problems we deal with are in the interaction between people. When we try to get people to buy into a concept or to change how they're thinking about something, or move them to want to do something. So basically, it's about motivation, it's about engagement, and so to me, it's really critical that from a project management perspective, especially in the leadership aspect of project management, that we leverage this knowledge, these insights, because unfortunately there is not a lot of information out there when it comes to leadership that is science-based, that is evidence-based. And I think we as project managers, especially those who come from a heavy technical background, we really want to see that there is some evidence behind certain concepts or certain insights. We don't want the psychobabble kind of, the inspirational aspects of leadership. We want to see, is there something scientific behind, for example, trust? Is there something scientific behind how people behave when their status is threatened, or when there is a sense of unfairness in a project team? What's going on in someone's brain? and how can I anticipate and see the signs of these dynamics happening before they happen, all part of that risk management, and be able to intervene in the proper way at the proper time so that we can change the dynamic of a project. So that's how I see the relationship and the connection to project management.
Mm-hmm. Another word that appears twice in the title of your presentation is culture. How does culture impact how we think, how we act?
Well, culture turns out to be very important and involved in virtually all aspects of thoughts, of feelings, and of behavior. We assume that we share many universal values and that we all think in the same way about some basic universal things, such as how we, for example, how we see things, what we see, what we pay attention to, how we mentalize or how we try to infer what somebody else is thinking. Also, we think that it's universal, for example, how we understand or detect another person's emotions. Well, actually, the science is telling us that actually that's not actually true. Culture actually impact how we see things. So, for example, there's been a lot of research in this area of culture between the differences between East and West, and that's been an explosion of research that tries to understand what are the differences in how people, for example, from Eastern countries, what they focus on when you show them, for example, an image when they are in a functional MRI scanner for neuroimaging, what brain activation they display if they are focusing on an object, for example, versus if they are focusing on the background. And so it turns out, for example, that people from Eastern countries, they have a more of a holistic view, or they focus more on the background, and they include more of the context versus subjects that are from the West that focus more on the actual focal object and the central object. And so the brain activation was the only thing that actually could show that actually between East and West we see different things. So this is just an example as to what we see. There's also research that looked at what we pay attention to. And again, if you, for example, put subjects from the East and from the West in the scanner, and you see how their brain activation shows up when, for example, you ask them to focus on the context when they grow up in a culture that is not used to that, where they focus more on objects, for example, from the West, they actually use more brain resources. They have to use more attentional resources, which is, in a way, it's exhausting to the brain when they have to actually think in a style that is different than what they grew up in, than culture, which leads me to believe that actually we are more comfortable thinking that everybody else is thinking the same way we do, because it's actually really hard and really it takes a lot of energy actually to try to put yourself in someone else's perspective and try to understand someone else's where they're coming from, and perhaps that the way they see, for example, an issue or a problem is different from us. And so this all goes to show that culture matters, and I just talked about 2 examples, but there are many examples, especially about the differences in how we detect someone else's thoughts and intentions, or how we interpret someone else's emotions, especially fear. Even the scientific research, early research thought that the amygdala, for example, which is the part of the brain that reacts to fear, it was thought that amygdala is very automatic when it detects fear, that it would automatically react with high level of activation. But it turns out that the research shows that it's actually the amygdala behaves differently depending on whether fear is experienced from people within the same culture or from a different culture. So, for example, if you show fearful faces to someone from the East, when they are in scanner, and that picture is, for example, Asian face, their amygdala will react more than if you show them a Western face, and vice versa. A Western person will react more, or the amygdala will react more to a fearful face from the West than from the East. And so this is very exciting and very important research is coming out that really focuses on why culture matters, because culture really affects the thoughts, the feelings, and the behavior.
Okay. In your title, you also mentioned that this is cultural intelligence for global project managers. So there is a difference between, shall we say, regional, local project management and global project management. That's what you insinuate with the title.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the misconceptions is that if you are successful in managing projects in your own culture, that you automatically can manage projects that involve people from other cultures. And I think when we start dealing with change and especially rolling out organizational change across cultures, or when we are trying to, for example, get problems solved with collaboration of teams that are in multiple cultures, culture actually adds another dimension of complexity. There's a lot more chances for misunderstanding. There's a lot more chances for threats that are due to a sense of unfairness. Status is very big in the sense that perhaps if you're not paying attention as a project manager, you could assume that someone from another culture shares the same thoughts, the same values, and when in fact you have to be very careful. Like, for example, yesterday there was a gentleman in my session who was working in Saudi Arabia. And he was talking about how he made a mistake and he entered a room that was only reserved for women, for example. But he didn't know that, and he didn't know that that actually is a very much like a taboo in that culture. And so he immediately realized what happened, and he apologized. And what he was surprised about is that the women in the room said, "That's okay, we understand." Once they saw that he was a foreigner, that he was not a native from Saudi Arabia. And so this just tells you this isn't just a simple example about you can really make some assumptions that could actually work against you if you go global thinking that everybody thinks the same way.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you came across?
I think the biggest misconception is what I just mentioned right now. It's this idea that basically if you can lead locally, you can lead globally. And here is the impact of this misconception: is that yesterday in the session I did an informal survey, and I asked how many people in the room are leading globally, and almost 75% of people raised their hand. And then I said, how many people were provided training for example, cultural training or some kind of global leadership training? And out of the room of 70 people, only about 2 people raised their hand, and one of them actually it wasn't 100% sure. So this is the biggest misconception, and actually it has a real impact in the sense that organizations actually believe that they don't need to invest in global leadership development. And I think that is the next frontier, in my view, in project management, is to focus on this area, because more and more companies are going global. More and more companies are opening new markets, as well as defending against competition from global markets or global competitors. And so project managers are at the forefront. They are at the forefront of change. And the biggest misconception is to think that we don't need training, and we do.
All right. You also mentioned to me before we started the interview this whole neuroscience approach to culture is also related to resistance to change and how we deal with change. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So the last 5 years I've been focusing on leadership and change from the neuroscience perspective, and especially from what matters to the brain, and how can we detect resistance before it happened, and how can we create interventions that can address that resistance, And I have been talking a lot about this framework called the SCARF framework, and it's from Dr. David Rock, who founded the Neuro Leadership Institute. And so the SCARF model talks about 5 domains of social drivers of social behavior. And these are the status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And I've been talking about them mostly in the context of own culture. And that framework turned out to be really effective as a diagnosis tool for change resistance. And so you can look at these 5 domains, and the majority of the issues you see with resistance to change will relate to one of these, and sometimes it will relate to more than one. So for example, let's say we are rolling out a new HR system, and this HR system is going to change how some departments will report to each other, or some managers will lose headcount, and so on. And let's say that organization headcount is a determinant of compensation, of the rank of managers, and so on. If that changes some aspects of how people perceive themselves in the organization, you will get resistance. And so, but it will not come across as resistance because of status. So that's why project managers have to become much more sophisticated in our understanding of these social drivers and understanding how the brain cares deeply about status, and it spends a lot of time comparing status. It spends a lot of time calculating about increasing status and decreasing status. Once we understand that, as project managers, we will be very sensitive to that. We will be very sensitive to signs that indicate that resistance is emanating from a threat to status, and then how can we address that. And so I talked about just status, but also certainty is very critical. The brain cares deeply about certainty. It cares deeply about fairness and autonomy, and also it cares deeply about relatedness and connection. Now, when you add the dimension of culture, all of these take on an interesting spin, or take on an interesting flavor, because now you have to take into account this social orientations toward being independent style of thinking versus interdependent, which is what science, especially social science and psychology, have found to be these 2 main drivers of behavior and thought, is how people think about themselves, whether they are independent, where they are unique, where the individual is unique, is a standalone, is in control of their destiny and driven by self-esteem and achievement and so on. While the interdependent, which tend to be more from the East, the independent is the individual is connected to a group. They don't see themselves as standalone. Their achievement and self-esteem comes from being part of the group. And so when you take these 2 dimensions and you put the SCARF as a matrix, for example, and you have status in the middle, and on one end you have the independent orientation, and on the other end you have the interdependent orientation, you can see that status means different things depending on where a culture sits in that continuum between the independent and the interdependent. So it opens up an exciting field of research, and also of exchanging ideas with project managers, especially project managers from the East, from Japan, from China, from India, and trying to understand how they actually apply project managers, not the PM box style project managers, but when they're not using the processes that are coming from the West, for example, what are they doing that work for them? And can we take that knowledge and infuse the project management thought leadership with what this type of thought process from the East can contribute to this knowledge of project management. So it's just a very exciting field. It's a very new field, new area of research, and I encourage all project managers to be curious about it.
Well, let's begin and let's try to translate it for our listeners. And so my first question in this regard is, how do I know as a global leader what matters to the team members and their culture? Are there any big ideas, any guidance that you can give us? How do I know what matters?
I think SCARF is really a great place to start. I think it's going to matter in each situation. What is important to that person. Each individual is different, obviously. Each situation is different and each individual is different. And that's why it is very difficult to have a framework that can work in all situations. So SCARF actually is a very situational, and what it does, it allows you to think about these 5 dimensions. And when you are rolling out a change, or you are encountering a conflict, or when you are experiencing resistance to change, you can very quickly ask these questions. Is this about status? Is this initiative, or is my approach, or is the problem at hand, is it threatening to the status in any way, shape, or form? And in the interdependent, for example, Eastern cultures, status matters very deeply because of the hierarchical nature of the social contract between individuals, that there is a hierarchy, that there is a status to be maintained, and it's important that a person knows their status within that group. And if you just ask someone to make a decision and they are from the East, sometimes they may not be able to make a decision, because making a decision could mean a threat to the status of someone who they report to. And you need to understand those dynamics and try to understand from a culture, if it is an interdependent culture, and if I am asking someone to make a decision, what am I truly exposing them to? And can I make that easier for them? Can I make some minor changes so that there is no threat to the status, either to them or to the people that matter to their career growth and to their future? I think certainty is also an important factor that comes into mind. I think we assume a lot. We assume a lot that everybody eats McDonald's, everybody watches the same TV shows, everybody uses Facebook, then we must be the same. And so we make some assumption, but we create uncertainty when we are not careful to see what is important to that particular individual in that particular culture to know and be able to be proactive. And so in general, what I say is what is important is to look at the SCARF, to pay attention to fairness, pay attention to relatedness and connection, and pay attention to autonomy and how you're either increasing them or you are decreasing them, how you're either threatening them or you are rewarding them, and make adjustments. And I guess the most important thing is to think about your thinking. That is the number one thing that I leave as an advice, is to be cognizant of your own culture, of your own thinking, and how it compares to the thinking of other cultures. And I think awareness is the first step into becoming an effective global leader.
Mm-hmm. All right then, so out of your research that you have done, what is the number one thing that you would recommend to all the global project managers out there, that this is the thing that you really have to do in order to have cultural intelligence as a global project manager?
I think the number one thing is to take charge of your leadership development, of your global leadership development. Take charge of that. Don't wait for your organization to send you to that training. In fact, a lot of what I learned in this journey was self-development and talking to other people, talking to other project managers, and creating my own research agenda. And so the number one thing is to, if you are going to be an effective global leader, to take charge of your development, take charge of especially your global leadership development, and do your own research. There are a lot of books. My website, we'll give the link at the end. I'm doing a lot of interviews right now with neuroscientists in this field. There's not a whole lot out there, unfortunately, when it comes to global leadership development. And so I'm trying to do my part by engaging people that are doing some great work. And I have actually just done about 3 interviews that are really going to be very helpful to project managers. I think the most important thing is to try to venture outside of the typical project management books. Study books by social scientists. For example, Dan Pink is one of my favorite, and he spoke yesterday the keynote, and I missed that session, although I interviewed him and I posted the interview on my website, and we talk about his 3 books. And what I like about Dan Pink is he is interested in this type of research. He does go and look at the social science research and try to link it to leadership. And so those are the kind of ideas that I give to people, is that take charge of your leadership development, venture outside of the typical project management book, and then connect with me because I'm on this journey, and I would love to have people connect with me, and we can all develop our own leadership skills, but also perhaps creating a body of work in this global leadership for project managers that everybody can benefit from.
Right. What's the website they can go to?
My website is, I have two websites. My pure project management website is Guerrilla Project Management, but I created a new website called Neurofrontier, and Neurofrontier is dedicated to helping project managers leverage this knowledge that is out there, this body of knowledge in the fields of neuroscience, of social science, as well as psychology, to enhance our leadership. And my focus right now is going to be more on global leadership and cultural intelligence and drawing from the cultural neuroscience field.
All right. Samad, thank you very much for your time today, and keep enjoying the rest of the Congress.
Thank you so much, Cornelius, for this opportunity.